So I'm pleased to be able to do the land acknowledgement this evening. This means a lot to me. This painting is done by Eli Thomas, Wolf Clan, Onondaga Nation, and it really shows the importance of the Tully Valley where I live. This could actually be Song Lake or Tully Lake, but it is an important region to the Onondaga, and as Eli put on the back of the painting, Tully is the first place for forgiveness with wampum. So I am truly grateful and thankful to be standing on the lands of the Onondaga people, whose ancestors have been stewards and resided here since time immemorial. We're gathered within the Onondaga reservation, recognized by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua. Many Haudenosaunee and their indigenous peoples still thrive in this area today, alive and strong, under the great law of peace. We must never forget that the land thefts and forced removal resulted in the abandonment of innumerable sacred sites, the loss of protection of thousands of unmarked ancestors' graves, the loss of their ability to carry on their spiritual, cultural interrelationships with the land, water, plants, and animals. So I am grateful. Thank you. Next slide, Joe. As I said, this is the first in the series of Removing Columbus, the virtual workshop series. The second will be taking place on March 24th, and it's entitled Why Removing Monuments Matters, Seeking Justice in Syracuse. This is a 90-minute workshop as well, but there will be more presenters that will examine the historical impacts of monuments as powerful political symbols and the evolution of shifting attitudes towards removing oppressive statues. Presenters will include Anna Taberzi, Gabrielle Piedamonte, Damianti Wallace, and Grace Fritzke. So if you want to register for this, you can do that individually on either the WISH or the Noon website, or there is a Facebook event page and you can register there. Okay, next slide, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is a collaboration. The effort of Noon, which I mentioned earlier, Neighbors of the Onondaga Nation, which is a program of the Syracuse Peace Council, and they have been supporting sovereignty for the Onondaga Nation for a very long time. I don't know how long, but it's been a long time. It's also brought to you by the Women of Italian and Syracuse Heritage, which is a truly grassroots group of women that formed with a shared commitment to promote historical truth-telling. We do a lot in WISH, and one of the things that we do is we share the joy of our Italian heritage. We also promote community healing, education, and outreach. I have to say that one of the things that I enjoy from this group are Women's Wednesdays, and if you haven't checked that out on their website or on their Facebook page, I really encourage that you do so. And we also have special thanks to the Syracuse Peace Council for their support in providing the Zoom platform and also for the promotion. Next slide. So let me introduce the captain of the ship, Hillary Ann Coppola. She works with Joe Heath as a community organizer and is also a member of WISH and Noon. And she has been the key liaison in putting these programs together. Carol Baum is also working behind the scenes as a longtime member of the Syracuse Peace Council and Noon. And I have to say, she's a master planner for events. I can't believe how quickly Noon works to get events out, organized and out on the street. So thank you. As a founding member of WISH, I want to thank you all for joining us for this presentation. So let me introduce Joe Heath. Joe Heath is General Counsel for the Onondaga Nation, and many of you know him for a variety of his accomplishments through his lifetime. He's a fighter for social justice, for environmental justice, and indigenous sovereignty. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody who's joining us this evening. And I particularly want to thank Tarky and Hillary and Carol and Wish and Noon and the Peace Council, because clearly without them, I certainly couldn't have put anything like this together. And I hope we can share some thoughts tonight. This evening, we're going to talk about the efforts by a small handful of people to prevent the removal of the Columbus Monument. And their efforts continue to divide our community and to prevent the healing that is necessary after 5 centuries of colonialism. They want us to forget about history. And they deny so many of the established facts. But the Onondagas have taught me that we must always begin by thinking back to before the colonial invasion and all of the harms that it caused. We need to think back to how the earth was stewarded and cared for by the Haudenosaunee. This small group of our population refuses to admit historic truths. They refuse to admit that slavery and its horrors began with the landing of Columbus. They deny the genocide of indigenous people and the systematic land thefts. They deny the reality, the horrible realities that continue today from the boarding schools. They also deny the critical race theory and any attempt to look back at history with a more honest point of view. And in this particular situation, they are working to deny the historic presence of the Onondaga Nation and to continue to deny their right to be heard. So in the context of this, we are going to talk somewhat after a bit about the lawsuit that this group filed against the city of Syracuse to prevent the removal of the Columbus Monument. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about historic facts, because that's what we deal with. This book, Admiral of the Ocean Seas, A Life of Christopher Columbus, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1943. Not very long after this colonial monument was erected, 9 years. And Morrison documents the historic truths of what Columbus's impact was in the Caribbean, and then as it spread throughout Turtle Island. Systematic mutilation of people who didn't bring enough gold because they said that there was gold there. Systematic rape, enslavement. He hauled 6 people back to Spain in chains with his first voyage. And after that, things did not go so well for him. He was, in fact, hauled back to Spain in shackles after the 3rd voyage. But he launched colonialism. And a year after he stumbled into the Caribbean was one of the key papal bulls in 1493 that are used as justification for the doctrine of Christian discovery and domination and for manifest destiny. These are historic facts as shown by the fact that this book got the Pulitzer Prize. Because what was unleashed in the Caribbean was horrendous. The use of dogs as another way of establishing control. And this still rings so true today. This is 2016, around Labor Day at Standing Rock. 5 centuries later, what has changed? Morrison's Pulitzer Prize-winning biography is based upon the actual journals of Columbus. And yet, when we quote them, these same people deny that that's what happened. And so here we are faced with a choice in our community. On one hand, we can continue to work together as an entire community, involving everyone in a broad discussion to heal the harms caused by colonialism and this historic racism. We can continue the efforts of bringing all the voices together, all nationalities and segments of our multicultural community. We can join with 175 other cities that have removed their Columbus monuments, including the city of Columbus, Ohio. And we could learn from the city of Buffalo, because their Italian American community asked to have the monument removed. And in so doing, they made this statement: our community is composed of a wonderfully interwoven mosaic of rich and varied cultures and traditions. Our decision to remove the monument is in keeping with our community's tradition of cultural diversity. Clearly, the same facts and thinking should apply to Syracuse. But instead, we have a small privileged minority that have filed a civil action against the city of Syracuse and personally and unjustifiably and in a shameful way attacked the mayor, who has done so much to try to pull the community together around this colonial monument. This is a small minority who feel entitled to be in charge. They don't want to give up their assumed privilege of making decisions for the entire community. They want to continue to tell the rest of us what to do, because they claim that their privilege is more important than a united, cooperative, multicultural community. So who are the members of the Columbus Monument Corporation? Well, we have a former county executive, a former chair of the Republican Party. That gentleman, by the way, using the term lightly, contributed to the Democratic opponent to Walsh in November's mayor, because until November, their main goal was to defeat Walsh in his bid for re-election. They failed pretty badly on that because he enjoys broad support of the community because he tries to work for the entire community. He was a former assembly member, 2 former state senators, a former county court judge, a former Supreme Court judge, former town supervisor, former county legislature, couple county legislators, and 24 others. And they think they can tell us how the community should handle this problem. But we need to remember that this small group does not speak for the entire community, and they don't even speak for the whole Italian American community. We understand that these specific Italian Americans have a desire to hold on to the legacy of their past. For many Italians who face discrimination, these myths that they cling to were a way to establish an American identity. But this unreality is based on idolatry of a man who deserves no honor. It's time to recognize the truth and to use that to move forward towards healing. So many Italian Americans from the past and present, truly worthy of praise for their talents, good works, and deed, but not Columbus, and not his legacy of colonialism, pain, and cruelty. And that is one of the strengths of Wish's Wednesday presentation of a different Italian hero every month. I urge you to pay attention to that as it goes along. So this group of people, even though they were intricately involved in all of the discussions that led up to the decision to remove the monument, they were heard disproportionately, actually. There was one committee with about 20 members, 10 of whom were Italian, including some of the main petitioners here. They were heard, but they did not like the outcome. So now they're trying to use their legal clout to tell the rest of us what we should be doing. Mr. Pirro announced this in January, then in April, they filed a lawsuit. And when I read the lawsuit, I was just incensed because it was so biased and created such a distorted view of what had actually happened. Rather than going through the history of all of the community discussions and what had come out of them and how people came together, they essentially said that Mayor Walsh did this on his own just because he doesn't like them. And it was so one-sided and inaccurate that I asked the council chiefs at Onondaga if they would authorize me to file a motion to join the lawsuit as an amicus curiae, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Literally, it's a Latin term that means friend of the court. And this is a vehicle that the nation has used sparingly because it allows them to be heard in court on matters that are of interest to them, but does not subject them to the jurisdiction of the court or the authority of the rulings of the court. The problem with it is that there are no rules for how this is done in the trial courts. By the time you get to an appellate court, there are specific rules for how this can be done, what you should include in it, and things like that. And so the lack of rules really makes lower court judges nervous. I can tell you that I've handled a number of these, some with more success than this one. And judges are also very, very reluctant to bring additional parties into a lawsuit because it complicates it and probably slows things down and brings in issues that he or she is going to have to rule on. So the rules that apply to amicus in the trial court have been developed by courts and case law. And we will go over what those are in a minute. So what we did was we filed a motion to appear as amicus curiae. We listed the nation's interests in the matter, and yet these same people who are suing the city vigorously opposed our right to be heard. Now, the irony of that struck me more than once over the last year and a half, because all too often, this group claims that they have the support of the Onondaga Nation, or that they had the support back in 1934. So they claim to speak for the nation, but don't allow them to be heard. So we filed our motion, and it should have been evaluated under these factors. This is a case from New York County Supreme Court. A state senator had sued the mayor because of some changes in the school rules, and the teachers union and another interested party moved to intervene because they had an interest in the matter. Their intervention was granted, not to intervene, but to join as an amicus. Their motion was granted. So you have to file these things right away so they don't delay the case, and we did. We filed it before the city's answer was due. It caused no delay whatsoever, but the judge made a spurious ruling on that, which we'll return to. Does it state the nation's interest in the matter? Yes. are the other parties capable of a full and adequate presentation of relevant issues? And if not, whether or not the nation could remedy this deficiency. Clearly, neither the city nor this group of privileged individuals can speak for the nation and talk about the harm that this statute has caused and continues to cause. Only the nation can begin to bring the harm that their citizens have had to endure. Only the nation can do that. And have we identified law or arguments which might otherwise escape the court's consideration? So clearly that factor, so we have to have interests that are different than the parties. We have to bring in new interests. These are the rules. And yet you'll see how that was used against us later on. There wouldn't be any prejudice to the parties if we had joined. And this last factor is actually one of the most important ones, particularly in this case, because amicus appearances are much more favored when the case involves questions of important public interest. Clearly, this is one of these. And ironically, after our motion was dismissed, and the petitioners were trying to justify that they had standing. That's a legal term that says you have enough of an interest in the matter that's different from the general public so that you have a right to bring the lawsuit. Well, actually, when we look at the case law, these petitioners do not qualify for standing, and yet they tried to make the argument there that because it was a matter of public interest, they had more of a right to be heard. So did the nation, but that didn't matter to them. So we had oral argument on the case in late October, and within 1 week, we got a summary denial. And the mistakes made in that denial are listed on this slide. First of all, the judge accepted papers, a so-called affidavit from the petitioner and a so-called memorandum of law that violated all rules of legal pleading. I would be ashamed as a law student to submit these papers. There were no facts in the affidavit, it was all opinions. And then they tried to bolster it by repeating them in what should have been legal arguments. Didn't bother the judge at all. Timeliness. He couldn't say that we weren't timely. And in fact, during oral argument, the petitioner said we don't claim that they were untimely. Should have been the end of that matter. And yet the judge went out of his way to say that if he granted our motion, it would delay the case. Well, that's just not true. I have all of the letters that he has approved since denying our motion that have multiple times extended the time for the petitioners to put papers into the court. We did not delay the case. We would not have delayed the case. They also claimed that the affidavit from Taradaho Sidney Hill, the declaration in support of the motion, was only to support the city, which again was not true. So the interest in the case that the nation articulated were, this is in Onondaga homeland. In fact, it's in the Canandaigua Treaty protected reservation. This is Onondaga reservation land. And under the recent Supreme Court ruling in McGirt versus Oklahoma a couple of years ago, this reservation is still intact. It has never been diminished or terminated by Congress. Now, I haven't found any local governments that can come to grips with what that means, but it certainly means that because this statute is in the reservation, that alone should have given the nation a right to be heard. And yet this judge just said, I don't know what bearing the treaty has. And he said, by raising the treaty, we had raised new issues. We are supposed to raise new issues, unique issues, not raised by the other parties. as we saw in the previous slide. And he essentially just dismissed all of our other legal arguments in the case. And we have to remember that their case asks for an injunction. That's a court order. That injunction would prevent the city from removing the monument. And the rules that apply when a court is evaluating an injunction, the fundamental and most important rule is, after everything else, the court is to balance the equities. Is it fair, given all of the history, that this court order be granted? And so a great deal of what we were trying to do was to bring in much of the historic trauma that this statute epitomizes, how that trauma is exacerbated by the current denial. And those issues were irrelevant to this court. We also talked about how it was important that the city had used a cooperative healing method of bringing people together to resolve it, and how this lawsuit and any granting of an order pursuant to it would be disruptive of that healing process. Didn't matter to this judge. In less than a week, he issued this opinion. And they like to talk about, oh, it's not about 1492. It's really about 1934. Well, unfortunately, they don't really understand that history any better than they do the colonial devastation in the Caribbean. This is a picture in Washington, D.C., 7 years earlier, where the Klan can openly march down the streets of this nation's capital. This is not a period of time that I want to go back to. And we also know from our research that the Italian dictator Mussolini helped pay for the transport of this statue. And 2 years after it was erected, 300 women of Italian heritage from the city of Syracuse donated their gold rings to be melted down and sent to Mussolini to pay for his colonial invasion of Ethiopia, which was just horrendous, full of war crimes. But more importantly, so Mussolini was in power long before Hitler. Mussolini came to power in 1922. He made up the word fascism to use the old symbol of the Roman Empire in power. And his 1936 invasion of Ethiopia was the first round in World War II, because when the League of Nations failed to take any meaningful actions to control Italy, it just gave Hitler the green light, and we know what happened from there. And in many other cities, citizens protested the Italian invasion. Now, we bring this up only to say that we should learn from history. And we should learn that some actions, while well-meaning at the time, really need to be re-examined and changed so that we can all work together better as an integrated community. So this goes back to the history and the interest of the nation. Clearly, this is in the small, is in the homelands of the Onondaga Nation. Here are those factors again. It's within the homelands. We talked about the 5 centuries of historic trauma from colonialism, because if the court were to apply the proper balancing of equities measure, these should be important. We also pointed out that the nation's citizens were active in the community, and that we supported his decision not only for the result, but also for the process. And still, this lawsuit continues. There was oral argument in the middle of January, the 12th or the 13th. And the judge, well, first of all, it was very clear which side he had a very, very strong favoritism towards, and it was not the city. But at the end of it, he promised his decision within days. Now that's 6 weeks ago. And from listening to the oral argument, it's clear to me that from his questioning that he was inclined to make rulings that would not stand up on appeal. And so that may be the cause for the delay. We don't know. Whatever the decision is, if it's against the city will appeal. That appeal will go to an appellate court in Rochester. And at that point, I will ask the nation for authority to file another amicus motion. We would have to start anew in the appellate court because that's the way the rules work. But we will be doing that. We will be supporting the city and urging everybody listening and all of the people that you can talk to continue to stay in tune on this issue, to continue to let the city know that you support them, to continue, easy for me to say, to continue to build unity and cross-cultural cooperation in our community. It's time for justice. It's time for healing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joe. Hi again, everybody. I'm Hill. And I just wanted to share with you all some things that you can do around this issue. It may seem that things are moving very slowly to replace Columbus, and that's true. So one thing that's really needed is to demonstrate how many members of the community are in support of the city's proposed changes. Noon and Wish have submitted guest opinions, but we also need more voices from individuals as well for the public and city leaders to see. So if you're in the CNY area and are close to Syracuse, you can submit a letter to the editor, which has a limit of 250 words. You can submit a guest opinion, which has 800. And the contact info is on the slide. If you have any questions, you can direct them to Marie Morelli, who's very helpful. One detail of the city's planned changes that has been stalled by the court proceedings is the Heritage Park project. And there's a website that they've developed to inform people about what they're doing, share redacted minutes, and they're also taking feedback. So if you haven't yet submitted your feedback about Heritage Park, I encourage you to do so. The link is right there. And one detail that you might be interested to know is that the Heritage Park project will not actually affect the Columbus Monument. They're being considered as two different issues by the city. So in your feedback, you can also express your displeasure that the Heritage Park project won't actually have any bearing on the changes to the Columbus Monument. For instance, if the Columbus Monument stays and we have a beautiful Heritage Park next door, you know, what kind of shadow will that monument continue to cast, and how effective will a Heritage Park site actually be if it has to be next door to an image of a genocidist? As Tarky mentioned at the beginning, if you want to learn more about how to change monument culture and the successful changes that have happened in other cities in the United States, there's going to be another session on March 24th, later time, 7 to 8:30 p.m. And there are a few different speakers, including Anna Taberzi, who is an ESF graduate in landscape architecture. and has presented on monuments and the politics of memory and how that affects us here. We'll also be joined by Gabriel Piedamonte, who's the founder and president of the Italian American Heritage Society of Chicago. Damian T. Wallace, who is co-founder of Good Kids Mad City, which is a Chicago youth group which formed after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High. And the activism of this group aided in the removal of 3 Columbus monuments. And our final speaker will be Grace Fritzke, who went to SU for religion. And her thesis was very focused on what we're dealing with here. And it's called Columbus as a Circle and Scano as an Ellipsis. So there will be lots of further information on this issue, both in Syracuse and elsewhere. And of course, always stay tuned to social media and emails from WISH, Noon, and SPC for more information or if there's going to be more public action. Can you proceed to the next slide, Joe? Thank you. Here's some more information that we will be sharing afterwards with all the registrants. So if you're not able to jot this down really quick, don't worry about it. WISH CNY is a newer group than Noon, but we've been pretty busy. And one of the things we're proud of is the educator materials on our WISH website, which you can access, as well as see the other things that we've been doing. You can contact us at hello@wishcny.org if you have any questions, suggestions, or want to learn more to get involved with us. We're open to meeting new people and collaborating with new people. And Noon has been very busy lately. We have a lot going on, as you can see. Cindy Sculacci leads the Witness to Injustice programs. She can facilitate that for your group over Zoom. It's very good for children as well as adults. And it's a very strong education tool that helps support people's understanding of these issues, not just in Onondaga territory, but across Turtle Island. Lindsay Spear, who used to work with Joe, she has developed a land acknowledgement kind of guide for your organization. This is kind of a first stepping stone to demonstrating solidarity with Native peoples, is to acknowledge the land you're on and the people whose land it is, as Tarky led us at the beginning. You may have heard about the lack of funding for Onondaga Nation School and the 2 other schools on Haudenosaunee territory. And if you're interested in getting more involved, contact Andy Major. He's the person from Noon who has been spearheading this. There also are emails going out from Noon about this as well, and on social media. And if you are not getting the newsletter, I encourage you to email Sue Eiholzer, who is our newsletter extraordinaire. She sends it out once a month. If there are special announcements, you might get 1 or 2 in between, but nothing too crazy. And I am going to close by handing questions to Tarky, and Tarky will read your questions out as we finish.
Well, I don't see too many questions at this point. Just asking about funding.
Question, sorry, I don't know. I'll put on chat though.
While we're waiting for questions, and of course, people can raise their hand if they want to just ask a question, which is fine. Oh, we do have some. Okay, we'll go to them in just a moment. I do want to say that the memo that Joe referred to for the amicus to the court is on our WISH website. So you can read the memorandum if you're interested in reading the entire piece to the court. I also neglected to say earlier that this is being recorded and will be available on the Syracuse Peace Council YouTube page. All right, thank you. Ray? Want to unmute yourself, Ray? And I can't see everyone, Hill. Grace is kind of taking up the screen, and I'm not sure why. So I can't see everybody at this point.
That might be due. I think I just was accidentally unmuted. Sorry.
Here we go. Here we go.
There you go. Okay. Hi,
Thank you.
Ray.
Thank you for your patience. Hi, Turkey. I'm curious about whether and how much of the other experiences across the country, including Columbus, Ohio, have been shared with the group here, with the people who are being so persistent in the lawsuit, to show how much the path they're on has been trodden already, and with very different outcomes. You know, why do they insist that their entitlement, the righteousness of their claims, is different than those other communities?
Do you want me to take this, Tarky?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'd be happy to. I was waiting for Joe to see if he had a response,
I'm
but
sure we all
I
do.
really do think that part of it.
My response.
Say what?
I said, you probably don't want to hear my response.
My feeling, because I have family members that are involved in that side of it, my feeling about it, Ray, is that they are really, their whole traditions, so much of their, the past stories of their uncles and their aunts and their grandfathers and so forth is tied to that statue, that it's really hard to let go. They are passionate about it, and that's part of it. It's that Italian heritage passion, but they are invested in it in that way, because it really not only is the story of Columbus then that is the myth, it's that whole past history of idolizing him that their families have done for so many years that's a myth. So that's why it's so tough from my perspective. Hale, you wanted to add? And then we'll go to Barbara.
Well, what Ray opened with was, haven't they heard about, you know, the changes that are happening in other cities, and that this is, you know, we hope inevitable. But I just wanted to note that we have a small vocal minority here, but that small vocal minority is everywhere. And there's, you know, certain Italian Americans banding together across the nation to essentially save Columbus, which is rather unfortunate. So I would say they're well aware of what's happening nationwide.
And if I can chime in also, we've certainly tried to help them, first of all, with historic facts. I've done a great deal of research. I know Grace, who's going to speak in the next one, has done a ton. This was discussed at considerable length, I'm told, during the various committees. It's not as though they haven't had the opportunity to learn. It's that they refuse to listen. We certainly have tried, and that's why we keep working. And that's why we need everybody's help on this call, to just keep educating and agitating and organizing.
Barbara?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. Has the Roman Catholic Diocese in Syracuse in central New York been involved with the Monument Corporation? And my second question is, in regards to Italian heroes, why aren't they looking at Giuseppe Garibaldi? I'm not Italian at all, but I consider myself a student of history, and that would be someone I would think in Italian heritage that would be looked up to. Also, back to my first question about the Roman Catholic Diocese, also what about the Knights of Columbus? Have they also had influence in this case?
Well, definitely the Knights of Columbus do. I don't know how many of these people are in that organization, We don't hear them discussed. I don't think that the Roman Catholic Diocese is actively, or at least not openly, supporting this group. We have a relatively new bishop, and he's actually sent a very, very progressive letter calling for the revocation of the papal bulls upon which the doctrine of Christian discovery is based. And so for a Catholic bishop to do that, first of all, it's the result of a lot of work and organizing, but it's also a very progressive position. I was hoping that after we met with the bishop and we learned of this letter, that it might have some impact on them. It hasn't changed a single word of what they've been saying, and they didn't listen. But I don't think that that the bishop or anybody downtown, right across the square from this monument, I don't think they're helping them actively.
And Deborah Rizzo.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm new to Zooming with you folks. I'm Italian, and I thought there was progress about getting rid of the statue. And I'm interested, I'm sorry I wasn't paying close attention in the beginning to what Joe Heath, what you were talking about in terms of the politics locally. But it seems to me, as with the statues of the Southern generals from the Civil War, that this is part of something that is right-wing Republican garbage. Is it possible that that's, I mean, you mentioned the name Pirro, and I grew up in Syracuse, and the only association I know with the name Pirro is the funeral parlor. But they were, you know, back in the day when I was going to the St. Peter's Church, the Catholic Church, they were considered elite. And even you mentioned Knights of Columbus, that I didn't know it still existed, but it always seemed kind of silly to me as a kid. But I'm thinking that this has more to do with the kind of political atmosphere we have right now, with some of these idiot Republicans who are just going to find things that they can complain about, whether it's masks or civil rights ornaments or, you know, do you think that that is partly what's inspiring this more recent rebellion, and that's not the right word, this most recent attack on going ahead with taking the statue down? I'll stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh.
You hear the same arguments from this group that we hear from people defending Confederate statues.
Mhm.
Shouldn't be talking about slavery. That's a long time ago. You know, what's your problem? Get over it. That's what people say. You shouldn't be talking about the fact that we stole all your land and killed 95% of you and tried to assimilate all the rest of you. And then we put up a monument to the person that was responsible for that and don't listen to you. It's the same arguments that we hear. It's the same denial of critical race theory. We even have our former governor now joining the right wing because
Yes.
finally that's what he was due. So yes, it's a macho dominated.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that Cuomo is joining the right to keep the
Actually,
statue up?
Cuomo isn't joining this statute. He defended the Columbus statute in New York City very vocally before he had to find another job. This week, he came out, and it's his beginning of his rehabilitation, denouncing what he calls the cancel culture. He claims to be victim of that. It's people with power assuming that they have a right to it and assuming that the rest of us don't. And I don't think there's anybody in that petition that is non-white. So I think the facts speak for themselves. It's the same, cling to the old myths, regardless of the fact that they're so harmful to other people. Seems very much the same to me.
Thank you, Joe. Deborah, does that answer your question?
Well, to be honest, I'm really more confused now, but I'll
Okay.
listen.
Oh,
I'm going to go to you, Gail. Well, let's go to you first. There's a couple questions in the chat, but let's go to you first.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for this presentations and putting it together and making it available to all of us. I really appreciated the update and knowing more about what's going on. When I lived in Colorado, I was involved in the anti-Columbus, Transform Columbus Day movement in that state. And very similar dynamics, but also very different. I think that on some level, each community has to work it out for themselves, because even though there's so many threads that are national, there are so many threads that are historical that have been around for a long time, but it's also a decision that communities have to make for themselves, even when it's long and tedious. In Colorado, they started the movement was started in 1989. They started the movement towards transforming the Columbus Day holiday, and the transformation, which was to get rid of the holiday, the state holiday, just finally kind of came to a close only a couple of years ago. So it's like 35 years of all kinds of activism over a period of time to actually make that change happen. Now here, of course, we're in a moment of time where the acceleration of change has occurred around the country, but it is still a local activity. I think Tarky's speaking about her relatives and that whole thing around having to let go of their own heritage in order to move forward is a very powerful motivator, as well as the power issues that Joe talks about, which are probably more powerful than the historical. But I just thought I would add that in.
Thanks,
you.
Gail. Sometimes those power issues and family issues are one and the same. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, there are a couple questions I want to throw your way here, Joe. One question is, when was the Amicus Curiae first filed, and when was it dismissed?
It was first filed in September and dismissed early in November. It's like most of our attempts to get into court. The judges say, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't know what to do with an Indian that comes to court. So get out of here. You're dismissed. Time and again, we file motions of great substance and they're dismissed before the courts even listen to them. So less than 2 months.
Yeah, all right.
Yet 5 months later, this same judge that said he was in a hurry to rule on the merits, he hasn't ruled on them. So a quick denial.
What is being planned when Judge Neri renders a decision? I don't know, maybe Hill or Joe first and then Hill?
Certainly, the anticipation is that the decision will go against the city and that he will issue an injunction that would order them not to remove the monument. The city will immediately appeal that. And that appeal would go to the appellate division in Rochester. It's an intermediate appellate court between these lower courts and the Court of Appeals in Albany. Just a second, please. And as I said earlier, I anticipate that I will be given authorization from the Council of Chiefs to file another amicus appearance. So that's the legal end of it. My sense from listening to the oral argument on the fundamental issues that the judge will rule on is that if he does not rule in favor of the city, he will be in pretty serious legal error, and that the ruling will be much different in Rochester. However, because we all know that this is also a big political issue, I'll let Hillary handle the rest of the answer.
So Wish and Noon and the Peace Council, we're all waiting with bated breath to see what Judge Neri decides. And if you are on the Noon local list, you will have received an email from Sue asking you to stay tuned for a public action, especially in case of a decision against the city. And that will happen downtown the day following an announcement of the decision. So I encourage you to email Sue if you're not on the Noon list yet, because that's the most direct way to get updates. And beyond that, Wish and Noon are going to be continuing to be involved in this, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more.
Okay, thank you. There is, oh, Colleen, go ahead.
Tentatively, we are hoping that to have, I'm not going to call it a demonstration, but an action the day following the decision, most likely at noon at the Circle. We're asking for like-minded people that, you know, if it doesn't go our way, to show up there, possibly wearing something black as a symbol of our disappointment in the decision if it goes that way. We hope that that will draw attention to the local community, that there are still people that are dissatisfied with that outcome. Now, if it goes the other way, that's great, but we're trying to be ready for any decision.
Yeah, thanks, Colleen.
Yep.
Any other comments on that? There's one more question in the chat here, but we can probably continue some conversation if folks are into it. The question is Onondaga Nation fundraising to help with the legal costs this involves? How can folks support the Onondaga Nation in the removal of the monument?
Well, let me take the first question first. It's the simplest. No, Onondaga is not contributing, at least to the city's legal costs. They do pay me, but that's the arrangement we have. So no, the city is perfectly capable of taking care of its own. First of all, it has a legal office in the Corporation Counsel, and they have also retained the Hancock Estabrook Law Office to defend them on this. But they're taking care of that that expense. What was the second?
How can folks support the Onondaga Nation in the removal of the monument? Hill may have addressed some of those, but.
Well, yes, it's through Noon and the Peace Council and Wish to stay involved. Letters to the editor are very helpful. The paper understands this is an important issue. They've done, they certainly try to appear fair and balanced and will publish any letter from the other side. So that's a good way to raise consciousness about this, and generally stay in tune with Noon and Wish and the Peace Council and come to rallies. I don't know who you can write if we're going to have a letter writing campaign. That's the weird thing about judges. But political support, statements of support, and you know, I'm sure every one of us has had some experience where we're talking to a neighbor and somebody will say something that really shows a lack of understanding of history and sovereignty. So we have to learn to be willing to step in at that point and turn that into a teaching moment. and talk about how the land was taken care of for thousands of years prior to the European invasion. Talk about the desecration of their sacred lake and the fact that they can't have any interaction with it yet because the county of Onondaga still refuses to return any land. But the real answer to all of these historic justice is the land back movement. In Canada, they tried to talk about truth and reconciliation. The Onondaga said, what is there to reconcile to? That's not a useful term here, unless everybody goes back to Europe or something. But if we're going to take care of some of these historic harms, when it comes to truth and reparations for Indigenous people, it must be the return of land, substantial portions of land, and in their complete control and jurisdiction. That's how we can support the Onondaga Nation and other nations. You saw that map where they had 2.5 million acres and now they have 7,500? That can't go on. We just got some fairly good news relative to their land rights action. Most of you know that it was dismissed by the federal courts. That was another shameful. I argued that appeal on Columbus Day in 2012, and 1 week later, the Second Circuit threw it out. They're in an awful hurry when we get to court, it seems. But because the U.S. courts would not provide any justice for these acknowledged land thefts, the nation filed a petition against the United States, charging the United States with human rights violations in the Organization of American States Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We filed that in April of 2014. That body is unfortunately very underfunded and dominated by cases from Central and South America that involve the immediate threat to human life. And so cases like ours don't get as much attention. But last week, we were told that we passed the first hurdle there. The decision was whether or not to throw the case out or evaluate it as being sufficiently strong so that it would be sent to the United States and they would have to answer. That's what happened last Monday. The United States now has 3 months to tell this international body to answer our arguments that they violated the human rights of the Onondaga people for the illegal theft of the land, for the environmental destruction of their land, and for having courts that provide absolutely no remedy for treaty violations. We are in an international arena. We have gone to the second round. And when I was able to report that in the Longhouse last Thursday, it was really well received. And so we must support the return of land to the Onondagas and other Indigenous people.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Gail, you have your hand up. And then,
I didn't put it down.
oh, you didn't
So,
put it down.
I didn't put
There's
it down. I need to put it down there.
You know, it's hard for me to see whose hand is up down in the corner there. Just can't see the name. Go ahead and, if you have your hand up, unmute your microphone and talk, because I can't see on this platform. No? Margaret, you didn't have your hand up? I thought I saw. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I'll go back to the chat. I want people to know that if you do want to be part of the action, as Hill said, contact Noon or the Peace Council and make sure you're on their listserv, and you'll get the information to become involved. And if you have Instagram, there's that too. Or Twitter.
I also want
Holly?
to add quickly
ahead.
that Syracuse cultural workers and Noon still have a supply of the Celebrate Diversity, Replace Columbus lawn signs. Those of you that live in Onondaga County may have seen the Mayor Walsh, keep your hands off the Columbus Monument lawn signs. So we have our own lawn signs available so that we can represent what we believe in. So you can go to the Noon webpage and find contact info there to get one if you don't have one yet. And there are also buttons available if you want to wear one on your jacket, or on your hat as you go about the city, get into conversations with people.
All right. If there are no more questions, and I want to be sure there are, that we covered every question here, but if there are no more questions, then I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And be sure and join us on the 24th.